All right, everybody. Hello and welcome. It is Thursday, October 2nd, 2025. You are here for How to Navigate the Layoff Journey. My name is Albert of Albert's List. We're a job search, AI, and side hustle education organization based out of here in the San Francisco Bay Area and looking to help you become the most indispensable professional ever. That is, we want to give you the skills that you need in order to survive and not just survive, but also thrive in this really wacky, crazy job market. And so, with that today, we're doing a little bit of a different webinar. As you may know, if you attend any of these webinars, you know that we like to hand over a presentation. But today, we're going to do this interview style because I think this is a really important topic where we talk about layoffs. And today, we have Steve Jaffe here, who is author of The Layoff Journey From Dismissal to Discovery, Navigating the Stages of Grief After a Job Loss. Steve is a former executive, a seasoned executive who has navigated the emotional and practical challenges of career transitions firsthand and guides readers through the 7 stages of grief: denial, anger, bargaining, depression, acceptance, reconstruction, and renewal. And he's written an entire book about it, as we just mentioned. And so today we're going to talk about that book. We're going to talk about layoffs, and we're going to talk about how you, perhaps any of you who might have been laid off, anticipating a layoff, or going through it right now, can survive that and be somebody who can navigate it and thrive. So, Steve, it's really great to have you here.
Thanks so much, Albert. I appreciate it. It's great to be here.
Yeah. So, right. I think we definitely have a very engaged audience of individuals who have been laid off in their lives and so forth. And so, tell us a little bit about your professional journey and what brought you to writing this book in the first place. What
Yeah,
inspired you?
yeah. So, uh, the first time I was laid off, it was the spring of 2001, and I was living in San Francisco. I was working at an ad agency, and it was the height of the dot-com bubble. Little did I know, but that bubble was going to burst, and the client that I was working on ended up going bankrupt, and the agency had to lay off all the staff that was working on that account. So that was the first time I was laid off, and it took me very much by surprise and quite a long time to really recover from. I didn't have any coping skills. I didn't really understand what the layoff meant genuinely. Like I took it very personally. Um, Fast forward summer 2023, I'm now at my fourth layoff over the course of my career, and I sail right through it. It's like water off a duck's back. And what I realized is that over the course of these 22 years and 4 layoffs, um, I developed a set of coping skills. I learned how to navigate the stages of grief that come from a job loss. And um, in that layoff in 2023, there was about 20% of the company that was laid off along with me. And I found myself wanting to um, talk to those folks I was laid off with and tell them all of this, like, kind of advice, life experience, to help them get through it in the way that I had learned how to. It was at that point when I realized that that would make a really good book because not only could I help the 20% I was laid off with, but I could help so many more people as well. I had always wanted to write a book. I just didn't really have the subject matter. And this kind of all came together with a big light bulb. And that was my journey from first layoff to fourth layoff and how I came to around to writing a book. I had no idea that 2025 was going to be the year that it has been for layoffs. I think
Hmm.
for many, it's not a question of if, but when. So if you haven't been affected yet, you just maybe wait because you might. And it's good to understand what you may go through or what you are going through in a way that will help you get through it, maybe in months rather than years. One of the things that I really stress is it's important to manage this grief before you jump back into the job market. If you don't process these emotions, they're going to manifest while you're looking for the next job, while you're interviewing for the next job, and maybe when you land the next job, you might bring that with you. So it's important
Hmm.
to understand and manage this because it'll set you up for success.
Yeah, I mean, it resembles like I'm reading through. the seven stages of grief. And it's like anything else in life, whether you've broken up with someone or whether you've lost a loved one or whether you got rejected from something. And so how do your seven stages, do they differ from these other ways to navigate the tough things in life? And what's similar and what's different?
Yeah. So the stages of grief were created by a researchist, Elizabeth Kubler-Ross. She was conducting research against terminally ill patients and found that they went through these stages. Then found that their friends and family also went through these stages as their loved one was passing on. Um, since that time, it's kind of been widely accepted that these stages of grief are universal for the human condition. Any traumatic life event, you tend to go through these. Um, you don't necessarily go through them in the linear way that maybe like you read them off or they're listed in the book by
Yeah.
chapter. Sometimes you may go through one more than the other. You may bounce around. You may have multiple stages all in the same day, and some days maybe you don't have any at all.
Hmm.
But the point is, knowing that this is kind of a mapped way of understanding how we deal with traumatic life events gives you some security to know, okay, like I'm not on uncharted territory here. There's a roadmap, there's a path through this. And I think there's some comfort in knowing that. So what I had found was that as I sought to understand why the layoff for me in 2023 didn't have the same effect as it did in 2001, and I was looking into and researching these stages of grief, I found, you know what? I had gone through these and I learned a set of coping skills that allowed me to successfully and in a healthy way move through them and process them.
Yeah. Would you say that your ability to job search or a larger network or years of experience helped you look at these seven stages differently? Or is it just you go through them enough like somebody in Silicon Valley does, and maybe denial is about 2 minutes and then anger is about 2 days, right? Like, I've been laid off many times in my own life, and one of the things that I developed through Albert's list was how do you get through this quicker?
Yeah.
And, a lot of it is maybe deflection and avoidance, but the other part is, well, the one way you get this job loss is through massive action. So for me, whenever I get laid off, I usually see it coming because it's not great. But the other piece is I'm reaching out to my network days beforehand, and then there's already some kind of infrastructure built. I didn't have that when I was 22, but I have that when I last did my job search at I think 35, and so it kind of just it's a sort of a different vibe, I guess, of sorts, right? Would you agree with that?
The value and importance of a network is
Yeah.
huge. So one of the things with a layoff, you're losing your community, those people that you spend every day with, right? Those
Mm-hmm.
people that you are in the foxhole with, friends, colleagues, maybe mentors. When you walk out of the building, a lot of those relationships end. It's important that you have a community outside of those people that you work with, because that other community is going to be how you're going to find your next job. But
Yeah.
a really important thing that kind of opens the door for some of this in terms of healing is is dispelling the shame and embarrassment that comes from a layoff.
Mm-hmm.
So often now, for folks in the Bay Area, especially in technology, there may not be as much shame and embarrassment because it's kind of a regular occurrence. But for others, there's a real shame and embarrassment that comes from a layoff. You feel like I do something wrong? Is this a declaration on me and my self-worth? Um, am I not a good employee or worker? And you start to question yourself. And that holds you back from reaching out and talking to others, right? And in this market where when a job posting gets like 500 or 1,000 applicants, um, without a network, you're going to have a really hard time breaking through and rising to the top of that inbox. I think that the hidden job market is very real. And
Hmm.
the only way you can tap into that is through a network. So, 40% of all Americans have been laid off at least once in their career.
Wow.
So what you find is that more people have actually been laid off than you're aware of. If you reach out to your network, you may find that other folks have been laid off as well. They may not be talking about it because they have their own shame and embarrassment with it.
Hmm.
Um, so there's a huge level of comfort and support that you find from that community, that network, not only in your job hunt, but just in folks telling you, listen, you're going to get through this. It's going to be okay. Here's how I got through it. Here's the skills that I learned to help me cope. So, um, yeah, I think, and the important thing with the network is that you build it and you nurture it before you need it.
Yeah.
So, you don't want to do that after you've been laid off. You want to have that in place so that when you really need it, the in case of emergency break glass, you've built up enough goodwill when you reach out and say, "Hey, do you know anybody that's hiring?" You have that they'll help you navigate that.
Yeah, absolutely. So we are here for how to navigate the layoff journey with Steve Jaffe. This is being done interview style. If you have any questions, please put them in the Q&A or in the webinar chat. You can also use the webinar chat to network or let us know where you're dialing in from. We always love to see where people are calling in from, and it's always exciting to see our global reach. So I wanted to talk a little bit about the uh, shame aspect because I'm very, I think, cognizant of that because every single, I think, layoff is something different, right? Either it's because you didn't do the work, or recently it's because AI, or because the corporate executive made the wrong decision and all of a sudden revenue is plummeting instead of going up. How do you recommend somebody work through those kinds of emotions? Because I think it's easy to justify that perhaps your value has declined,
Mm.
when in reality, sometimes it's just investors pressuring leaders to do something that maybe the leaders don't want to do, but inevitably ends up happening because it's the hot thing to do right now.
Yeah, yeah. Here's the truth. The truth is, it's easier for companies to cut headcount than it is to drive revenue to the bottom line in times of need, right?
Mhm.
So whether it's a recession, it's a global pandemic, AI in terms of like black swan events transforming the marketplace, increased competition, whatever it is that's challenging the business, at any given time, you can drive more revenue quicker to the bottom line by cutting headcount than you can by increasing sales through your pipeline. So it's a knee-jerk reaction to market conditions and nothing more, right?
Mhm.
So employees, this isn't, there's a no-fault termination. A no-fault termination is a layoff. If you are at fault, then you've been fired, and that's something different. That's something where you've done something wrong and you're being let go. A layoff, you're basically a number on a balance sheet, and I've seen people who have been employee of the month in January and lose their job in July. Um, they've
Mhm.
been held up as the preeminent employee, the model employee, and yet 6 months later, there's no job security. Why? They weren't a bad employee. They were just kind of in the wrong place at the wrong time. So, that's a really good way to start to think about your layoff. And it starts to take the wind out of the sail of that shame and embarrassment, right?
Mhm.
You start to disconnect your identity from the job, right? The job is something that you did, it's not who you are. You have skills and talents and experience beyond what it says on the business card. So sometimes we get kind of caught up in our title, our responsibility, the work that we do, and we derive meaning and purpose from that. When that job is taken away, sometimes it can feel like our meaning and our purpose have been taken away. But it's important to know that those are inalienable skills that you're going to take with you wherever you go. Um, they are fully transferable. So you may have a setback with that job being gone, but it's not a permanent. It's not a roadblock. It's merely a detour. Um, so starting to chip away at that, um, like um, ownership that we almost have over our jobs, right? And the way
Yeah.
that it becomes the way we define ourselves. What's really important is that you find ways to define yourself and define your purpose and joy outside of work so that if and when that job is taken away, you have something that is still fulfilling and meaningful to you.
Yeah. I mean, I think that in the Western culture, right, we definitely tie our own self-value to the job that we have. I'm curious too, as somebody who's also been an executive, have you had to make the tough decision to lay people off?
Ooh. I've had to let some people go,
Mhm.
not from layoffs,
Mhm.
um, fortunately. Uh, I'm happy to say that I haven't. No.
Yeah. Yeah, I only ask because you've been in that executive role where that ability to like do it might have been given to you, right? And so
Yeah.
I always wonder when the executives do the laying off or when the boss is doing the layoffs, it's always done in this really cold, robotic,
Mm,
scripted manner. And you basically an HR person reading a statement off a piece of paper, and you're like, dude, we just got lunch yesterday. What the heck? Right? And
right.
so it becomes this like whole thing of very much like charades.
Yeah.
So Christy has a question.
Mhm.
Let's take that one first. I've heard mixed advice from recruiters, lawyers, and HR professionals on resigning versus staying if you're on a performance improvement plan or noticing a trend for a wave of layoffs might potentially be coming. What are both your and Albert's perspectives on staying versus a layoff and the impact it has on your credibility as an employee?
Okay. Okay. Um, Let me separate that because there's kind of two questions in there. So let me take the performance improvement plan question first. Um, I would say I won't say 100% of the time, maybe 95% of the time. Performance improvement plans are performative for the company looking to document how they're going to exit someone. There really is no way to successfully exit a PIP where you end up back sort of in good terms and in favorable relations with everybody. Usually the PIP is going to end with them just documenting over an extended period of time how they're going to terminate the employment. So if anybody ever gets presented with a PIP, it's always in your best interest to probably just resign because they're going to put you through an exercise that you won't be able to win. They're going to put a bunch of roadblocks in front of you and ask you to try and achieve stuff that they purposely designed it that it's unachievable. Um, the second part of the question is if you see layoffs are coming, if you feel like the company's heading in a downturn, maybe they've announced layoffs and you think you might be on the chopping block, I would say it's always good to stick around because if you stick around, you're probably going to get a severance package. They're probably going to pay out some sort of additional like salary. You're probably going to get some carryover on your health benefits. And you can probably have some negotiation room there to ask for some other concessions. So I always would say stick around, stick it out. Um, and see it through because you probably will get more from it than if you leave on your own.
Yeah, that makes sense. And I agree with I agree with everything you just said there. One thing that I think that is interesting to note that I think I kind of have made a conflation of over these last 20 minutes is layoff and getting fired or getting terminated. I almost feel like in some ways these terms are very interchangeable in today's job market for one reason or another because and I think a lot of companies don't necessarily use all that much care in trying to differentiate the statement anymore. You've
Mhm.
just been terminated or you've just been I mean, right, there's a lot of innuendo like reduction in force, right? Things
Yeah,
like that.
right, right, right.
So that's kind of where we're at this juncture.
I
Another
think the
question.
thing
Yeah.
to keep in mind is when you're going for your next job, right?
Hmm.
Your future employer is going to contact your past employer. The
Yeah.
one question that they can ask legally is, are they eligible for rehire? And if they say, yes, he's eligible for rehire, that means that it was a no fault termination and they were a great employee and they just got laid off, right? If they say, no, they're not eligible for rehire, then that means you may have gotten fired. And therefore, the inference is maybe they're not going to hire you because that's what they've gotten. So
Hmm.
that's kind of the difference between a layoff and a firing is if you're
Yeah.
eligible for rehire. And that subtle change can make all the difference when you're going out and you're trying to get your next job. One of the things I say is when you leave under a layoff, make sure that you find out and you get it in writing. I'm eligible for rehire. Get them to put that on your file. That will make all the difference in the world when you're trying to interview for your next job.
Yep. Another question. What is your opinion on targeting older workers during layoffs?
Oh gosh. Well, it's illegal. Ageism is discriminatory, and there are protections as it's a protected class. But here's the thing about layoffs. So there are very strict hiring practices and equal opportunity rules and regulations that companies have to adhere to. Um, and there's a lot of transparency in those hiring practices. There isn't a lot of transparency in layoffs. So um, it's very easy for companies to identify um, any type of protected class in layoffs, including older folks. Um, so it's been documented pretty well, but I think if you're over a certain age, you may see a disproportionate amount of folks departing, and it's unfortunate.
Yeah. Um, Another question. Do you ever think we'll move towards a trend where employees will have more protected rights over layoffs related to poor quarterly projections or to no fault of the employees?
God, I hope so. You know, it's a real shame that the people at the top that are making the decisions
Hmm.
that may make bad decisions that the business suffers because of that their decisions may be the cause for a decline in sales, customer churn, all of the different KPIs. They're the ones making the decisions. Yet, a lot of times it's kind of like the middle layer or maybe below that or the front line of who's getting laid off. Um, I would love to see more accountability. Um, but in today's economic climate, some of those same folks they're making really bad decisions and they're having decline in sales are making record amount in salary and bonuses and stock options and
And they get a
it
great elevate parachute too.
right. So it doesn't make any sense. But it's one of those things that it might be difficult to change.
Yeah, absolutely. All right, we got some more questions coming in here. How would you go about getting your former employer to put that you're eligible for rehire? And if you did not, how can you dig yourself out of the black mark for a potential hire in the future?
So one of the things that I talk about is so one of the stages of grief is negotiation. And there's sort of two types of negotiation that people go through in a layoff. The first type is the negotiation within themselves. They think about what could I have done differently? What could I have said differently to somebody? How could I have done this one project differently? Did those things have any factor in me getting laid off? And you go round and round on this. And those are questions that you're never going to get answered. Um, and the word of advice is to not look backward, to look forward. Instead of asking what if, ask what's next.
Hmm.
Change that mindset because it's a losing battle. But the other aspect of the negotiation is in your severance agreement. When you get laid off and they send you the severance agreement, oftentimes they'll stress that they want you to sign it right away. That's only in their best interest. And what people don't realize is um, their severance agreement that they're giving you is not their best offer. It's their first offer, and that severance agreements are negotiable. So you want to take your time and you really understand what they're giving you the same way you take your time and understand what they're putting in their offer letter and what your hiring package is. Um, so when you experience a layoff, one of the things you want to do early on is look at your finances, look at what you have saved for this rainy day, and understand what your needs are in terms of healthcare and other things, so that when you're going through that severance agreement, you can say, listen, maybe you're putting 6 months on the table in terms of salary, but you're only putting 1 month on the table for health care. I have really big healthcare needs. What if we flopped that? You gave me 6 months of healthcare and 1 month of salary instead. That's one way of doing it. There's all sorts of things you can ask. One time I got laid off and I didn't have a computer, and I asked them, "You guys mind if I keep the computer?" Right? Um, in this negotiation, this is where you want to bring up, hey, listen, for clarification, I want to just make sure I understand I'm eligible for rehire. And when a future employer calls, that's what the response will be. And that's when you want to get it in writing, part of the severance agreement. You want to get something that you get a commitment that yes, you're eligible for rehire. Um, if you haven't, and you were laid off, and you left on good terms, you can always go back and say, hey, listen, even though it was 6 months ago, I have an interview coming up, and I just want to make sure that if they call, you're going to confirm I'm eligible for rehire. Um, there are so another stage of grief is anger. And one of the
Mhm.
important things about the stage of anger is that when you do leave, you don't burn those bridges. And one of the reasons why is because when it comes time to negotiate that severance, you want all that goodwill on your side. Um,
Mhm.
they feel bad that they've had to lay you off, right? They have a lot of guilt.
So you don't tell
It's
them you can't lay me off, I quit.
no, but in that severance negotiation is a good time to push your chips in the middle of the table and
Yeah.
kind of cash in on some of that guilt. Um, but you won't be able to if you leave under like bad terms where you've lashed out or something out of anger. So you want to make sure that you manage that anger because it's going to come back to help you.
And what if your former employer does not want to negotiate, or soon to be former employer?
It never hurts to ask.
Yeah.
If they're really hard and fast, um, you might be able to get a little something out of them, but maybe pick the one thing that's really important to you. Like for me, the one thing was I really needed a laptop. And that's where I put all my chips in. Hey guys, I'll acquiesce on everything, but would you give me the laptop? Um, you know, companies that are laying off, like Facebook's laying off like 14,000 people. They probably aren't going to do a lot of negotiation because they don't want to negotiate 14,000 severance agreements. But if you're in a smaller company, probably more likely that you'll get some sort of concession.
Yeah. Um, yeah. Wow. I think a lot of people are very interested in the severance aspect of how you negotiate that too. Um, Anthony, you're asking, what about a job that has their pay rate in the job description? How do you negotiate hourly pay? I'm not really sure what you're asking there in regards to the layoff context, but if you can add more clarity to that question, I'm happy to answer. What if someone is given a written notice that includes lies or mischaracterizations of events, citing behavioral concerns, even though the same behavior had been considered acceptable for the last 2 years leading up to a layoff? What are the legal implications? I guess this would be the issue around that.
Yeah, I would say if you can afford a lawyer, an employment lawyer, I would check in with one. Um, Oftentimes they'll do something kind of pro bono, and review like the terms in the case before they decide, how they're going to set up any fees or anything. So you can sometimes get like an initial legal opinion. Um, I would make sure that if there's anything in that letter that they're documenting, what they're doing is they're documenting, but go through and see if there's anything that's been documented in the past, either way on that. Um, and that way you can have like a paper trail that says, well, here it says what I was doing was fine, and that was 6 months ago, and now all of a sudden it's changed. And sometimes, the rules of business often change. Is one of these things where it's like the ground is always moving under your feet.
Yep.
So they reserve the right to change the rules of the game anytime. And sometimes you have to roll with it. But it also could be one of those cases where sometimes you get a new boss in, and the new boss is like, you know, changing the landscape because they're setting the new tone or whatnot. But if you feel like there's something there that's egregious, definitely check with a lawyer.
Yeah. Are outplacement firms a waste of time if they're given money?
No, no, I think anyone should take all the help they can get,
Yeah.
as much as they can get, anytime they can get it, right?
Yep.
Like goodwill is a great thing to accept. You never know what you're going to get out of it. So I would say, listen, and it could be one of those things where maybe it's an 80-20, where 80% of the stuff they're offering may not fit, but maybe there's 20% there that's going to be really valuable. So I try and go into everything with open mind, and kind of a growth mindset. Like, what can I learn from this? Even if it's just one thing.
Everybody has questions here. Oh, how to negotiate for severance. I don't want to keep that to be the whole
Yeah.
conversation. Um, so I think the next part that I want to go to is second. So what your book goes into in strategy for both and identity. Right. So we touched on this a little bit earlier when we how you can uh, regain that kind of stuff. As you go into your job search and navigate these 7 stages, obviously they're going to show up in certain places. You're going to have moments where there's a lot of imposter syndrome. What are your best tips for navigating all of that? And like, what if you walk into a job interview and all of a sudden they ask you a question and it triggers something that just completely sends you in one direction that you didn't need to? Like, how do you navigate it?
Um, you cut out a little bit on the microphone there, so it's a little bit hard to hear you. But you're
Just
asking,
how do you rebuild your confidence during the interview process when it's so difficult and it's just uh hard to potentially like build that confidence when the job
yeah,
market is so.
yeah, yeah. You know, that's a good question. I think there are a couple like practical strategies that I've used that have worked for me. Um, Taking a pause, taking a deep breath, taking a minute, um, and just being intentional about what you're going to say. Um, that helps you stay present. It helps you not get ahead of yourself. Um, so those are a few in the moment. A pause and a deep breath can go a very long way, right? Um, the person that you're interviewing with, they want you to succeed, right? They don't want to see you struggle with the answer. It's like when people get up and they present in front of a room. When you're in the audience, you're hoping that that speaker does really well. If that speaker starts to fumble in the audience, you get embarrassed for them, right? Like you're rooting for them. You want them to do well. It's the same thing for an interviewer. When the interviewer is asking you questions, they're really rooting for you. So if you think about them as being on your side and as an ally, rather than an adversarial, they're trying to trip me up. They're trying to like, ask me some trick question. Um, it, Reframe how you're viewing the dialogue and the back and forth, and think about it as this isn't adversarial. This is a very friendly conversational dialogue that they want to see go well because you know they want to hire somebody. They want to find the best person.
And you
And
made
if
it to the interview process too.
exactly,
They're
that's a
still
win.
filtering you out. Like you're one of the top
Right,
four that they filtered in.
right. So all of these things are like, you know, you want to positive self-talk, positive affirmation, going into it in the right frame of mind is important. Um, Things that I talk about in terms of good self-care, make sure you're eating a really good diet, make sure you're getting exercise. If you are drinking, kind of limit your drinking, limit your alcohol intake. That'll help a lot of different things. Um, Practice a little bit of mindful meditation, some deep breaths. Maybe it's just praying, but something that helps center you and keeps you present. Um, these are all things, get plenty of sleep. These are all things that will basically kind of like put money in your piggy bank, put deposits in your corner so that when you show up, you're showing up as your best self.
Yeah. And what do you do when we have a market that's not like this one right now, where interviews are scarce, companies are continuing to lay off even after they laid off a few rounds? I know somebody who survived 7 rounds before she was
Ooh.
finally impacted.
Yeah,
Um,
yeah,
and like, how do you build your confidence that way? Like, right? Some of the things I think about are you go out and you network so that you at
yeah,
least feel like you're, touching grass and talking.
right.
Maybe you start your own project and you build your own personal brand and you build new skills. But a lot of those tend to be very one to one where it's just you to yourself. And in a world where a lot of the times validation comes from somebody else saying, hey, you did a good job, or hey, you're hired, or hey, we're giving you a raise. How do you sort of navigate that?
Yeah. That's where having your fulfillment outside of that other person's validation is really important. Um, but one of the you had a nugget of a question in there I want to come back to in terms of how do you break through uh, in today's world where there's like 1,000 applicants for every job opening. Your odds of even getting an interview are so small. Um, the hidden job market is really, I think, where somebody's going to break through your network, somebody knowing somebody that knows somebody that's hiring. They're going to vouch for you. They're going to put you in direct contact. Um, any like direct one-to-one contact that you can make with somebody, with the hiring manager, uh, set yourself apart, differentiate yourself. Um, Resumes going through ATS right now is a big black hole.
Yeah.
So relationships are really important, but it's why it's so important that you find your purpose and your validation, your joy, your passion, um, outside of what you're doing 9 to 5. Now, preferably, there's a convergence there where your joy and your passion and your work are the same thing. If you don't have that luxury, you should find that outside of work so that when you do lose your job, you aren't losing that as well. Um, People talk a lot about like a work-life balance, and I think it gets bucketed into like how much are you working and how much PTO are you taking? And that's not necessarily like the work-life balance equation. It's more about um, your personal values, how you fulfill yourself, what you find joy in,
Mhm.
your own personal North Star. I kind of write about the North Star in the book. Companies use the North Star exercise a lot to set their course and to find meaning and purpose. As individuals, it's really important that we set our own North Star. And from that, it can help you set a course on what you should be doing. Because sometimes a layoff is a good opportunity for a pivot, for kind of a get out of jail free card. You might
Yeah.
have had a job that you hated, right? You
Yeah.
might be in an industry that's under contraction. I had a situation where I'm in marketing and advertising, and marketing generalist roles were just being eliminated left and right. And I was on the job market and I saw product marketing managers for SaaS companies by the bucketful. Everywhere I looked, they were looking for product marketing managers. And with a little bit of kind of some wordplay and some tweaking on my resume, I was able to transfer and translate my marketing generalist experience into a way that someone hiring for a product marketing manager at a SaaS technology company could say, "Oh yeah, you've got that skill set." Um, that's a really good exercise. If you find yourself in an industry that's experiencing contraction, don't stay in that industry because you're just going to be continually faced with layoffs. Um, so something to think about. Sometimes layoffs give you the white space to think kind of big picture about where your career and where your direction is heading.
Yeah, and hold that thought for a minute. So you are here for How to Navigate a Layoff Journey with Steve Jaffe, author of The Layoff Journey From Dismissal to Discovery, Navigating the Stages of Grief After a Job. If you're here, thank you so much for joining us. Feel free to leave your questions in the Q&A and we will in the chat. So I think that's another good segue into the next question. If you've been laid off and you want to move away from the industry that you were in and into a new one. So, for example, maybe you were impacted and you want to go work into a nonprofit. What are some of your strategies and tips for doing that as you
Mhm,
navigate this next segment?
mhm, mhm. So sometimes you need to do some reskilling. Sometimes you need to do some upskilling. Sometimes you need to just examine what the transferable skills are and lean into those. Um, Sometimes it's just kind of like a repackaging and a repositioning. Um, what I would want everybody to think about, though, is sometimes after a layoff, you might think if I make this move, it feels like a step backwards. And I think it's important to understand that sometimes you may need to take a step backwards to take two steps forward. So in the short term, something may be a step backward, but long term, if it's in line with your North Star and how you want to move forward and what's important to you, that over time is going to pay dividends. It's like an oil tanker. If they're 1 degree off, or an airplane, if they're 1 degree off now, in a mile, they're like, I don't know, 30 degrees off. It's the same thing with your career. If you're 1 degree off right now in your career, 5, 10 years down the road, think about how far off course you're going to be. So sometimes that pivot, that course correction, is really, really valuable.
And if you've been laid off, how does somebody explain and review their job history with short date and really short employment stints? Because I know
Yeah.
over the last couple of years, I think the saddest thing that I see is people who spent years and years trying to make it into tech. And in 2021, when money was cheap and everyone was hiring, they finally made it in. And then in 2022, people started getting laid off. The party was over. And I've seen people who've been laid off like 3 times in 5 years, and it's just wild.
Yeah.
And so, how do you explain that during layoff?
So I would say if a hiring manager is questioning anyone's like tenure during the interview process, uh, I find that odd, especially if they're in tech or SaaS or any of these industries that are affected by layoffs so often. It kind of goes with the territory and goes without saying that this is just the way business is. Um, I wouldn't call attention to it directly. And I also wouldn't feel like it's in anybody's mind unless they say something. More often than not, they might not even be considering it. And if you think about things not in terms of like titles and companies. So for example, if I have a 30-year career in marketing and advertising, and I've worked for travel tourism, SaaS, smart city technology and whatnot, whatever it is, right? Those are my skills and experience. I'm not talking about companies I worked at or job titles I've held. I'm talking about my experience. And
Hmm.
and like finding that narrative that doesn't tie you to I was at this job for a year and then I was at this company with this title for 6 months. Like find the through line and find the story that has a story arc across all of them so that that person doesn't think of you as this person had, a VP of marketing at XYZ company for 6 months. They're seeing the big picture. And I think what's important today is you need to help people like spoon feed them that big picture
Hmm.
because it's easy for people to look at a resume and see maybe durations and titles. You want them to know the big picture and you want to know who you are and what you bring to the table.
Yeah, no, that's very true. Yeah, you can get a lot done in 3 months versus maybe somebody who's been somewhere for 2 years and has done it really, really, really slowly.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. All right. So the next thing I want to do is I want to go to the final piece where you have a framework for resilience and renewal. Um, in your book, you have a roadmap that really discusses turning job loss into something that launches you and rebuilds you into the next step of your career. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, yeah. So there's a framework of grieving. Set aside some time to grieve. This is a difficult process, and you need time to process it. Um, don't rush that, and validate that feeling of grieving. Um, you want to grieve before you move on. Sometimes people take action as like um, um, this really good thing. Like I was laid off on Friday, and on Monday I was doing my resumes, and I sent out 10 resumes. Not a great use of your time. You want to take some time to process before you
Hmm.
start taking that kind of action. So, working through the grief is really the first step. And then do some reflection. Um, uh, Understand, like, do you really love your career path? Do you really love what you do? Does it bring you joy? What does? And how can you find that alignment? Um, you want to use that downtime to ask yourself like big questions that you may not normally have time to ask. Use this pause as that get out of jail free card. Make the most of it, and that kind of self discovery exercise will help you like rediscover who you are and what you want to do next. Um, with that insight, then you can move forward intentionally. You can re-engage your network, rebuild those connections and those relationships.
Hmm.
Find those people that are going to help, friends, mentors, any peers that you had that you've worked with. Um, that's your lifeline to moving forward. And like I've mentioned, I believe that's probably the low hanging fruit and how you're going to get hired next, not in a pile of 1,000 resumes. And then reconstruct your path, map out your skills, your values, your opinions. Um, Imagine or reimagine your North Star and chart a course to a future that fits who you are. Um, and maybe that is a way of shedding light on how to find a pivot, how to find the opportunity in this. Um, And then with that, renew with purpose. This layoff is not an ending. Um, it's 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 not the it's not an ending.
It's a new beginning. Yeah.
It's a new beginning. It's just a chapter in your story. It's not the whole story. It's not a roadblock. It's a detour. So use it as a launch pad into something that's stronger and more intentional. But don't think of it as like we were talking about in the beginning. It's not a declarative statement on who you are, your self worth, your purpose, your intelligence, your experience. It's a small setback in a much larger career.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think the other piece around that is, how do you stay abundant during these times too? Because you may not have interviews coming in, LinkedIn may be really dry. And as Arathi says here, you may have friends and family who ask about how your job search is going in this tough market. And so how, what I guess I should say, one of the things when I've been laid off that I think about often is what I'm looking for is also looking for me. And
Yeah,
it's really ambiguous and incredibly vague, but it gets me through because I realize the alternative is looking into the chasm that is being jobless and realizing that if I look down there and I look too long, I may never come back out.
right, right.
Um, what is your recommendation for navigating that? And right, the
Yeah,
holidays are coming up, right? So we
right.
got Thanksgiving and Christmas, and friends who maybe have been working all year long are going to turn over to you at the dinner table while handing you the mashed potatoes and saying, "Hey, how's that job search going?" And all of a
Right.
sudden you're like, you're enjoying yourself and then you're going into this other thing. So how do you
Yeah,
navigate all
yeah,
that?
yeah. Well, two things. One, I think that's really important is establishing a gratitude practice.
Mhm.
In the layoff, there's a lot that's been taken from you. Um, if a gratitude practice, you're able to focus on what you have. Like you mentioned abundance, and that prompted me to really think about the gratitude practice because it reconditions your mind to think about abundance, right? Think about all of the things that are going right. So
Mhm.
if every day you make a list of 10 things that you're grateful for, you start to retrain your mind into positive thinking rather on that negative loop of all the things that are going wrong, right? So that's a really great self-care tool.
Mhm.
Um, and I think if I'm faced with the question of how's the job hunt going, I would try and reposition that into something that's going well.
Mhm.
So, maybe in the layoff break, I found time to go surfing, to do yoga, to go to the gym more, maybe read books, maybe go see some movies. These things that I'm doing that I'm rediscovering myself and like building myself back up. Those are great things to talk about. You talk about, oh gosh, the layoff the job hunt is a little tough, but let me tell you about this book that I'm reading right now. Let me tell you about this movie I just saw. I'm really happy that I'm able to go back to my yoga practice. All of those things will reposition the conversation into like the things that are filling up your cup rather than are draining it.
Yeah. Yeah. Awesome. Well, we are at the top of the hour now. And we've gone through quite a few questions as well. As you look at where this job market and this economy is headed, what are some pieces of advice you have for job seekers who may be looking at a much longer job search post layoff? And is there anything unique to what we may be seeing here in the next few months? Or is it quite uniform in terms of how you see everything evolving?
I think this is a very unique marketplace in terms of layoffs, the duration of
Mhm.
how long somebody is likely to be between jobs, the market conditions, the factors that are all at play here. There's so many all happening at once. Um, it is a difficult time for somebody to be out of work, and I have a lot of empathy for everybody that's going through it. I was out of work once for 18 months, and it was
Mm.
really, really hard.
Yeah,
Um,
that's a long time.
it was hard.
Yeah.
um, so, I would say first and foremost, be gentle with yourself. What you're going through is hard, and treat yourself the way you would treat a friend. If a friend came to you and said, "Wow, I've been out of work for 6 or 9 months. This is really hard," what would you say to that friend? How would you comfort them? Um, do that for yourself, right? Sometimes we can be our own harshest critics. Um, focus on what's going right. Focus on what you're doing that you can control. One of the things that I would do is I would focus on sending like uh, 10 resumes a week. I would customize each of them. I would network, and that was my goal. It was manageable, it was achievable, and it would give me some purpose and give me a goal that I could work toward. Find a goal that you can achieve, that you can work toward, and when you achieve it, give yourself a pat on the back, right?
Yep.
Um, don't be hard on yourself. There's plenty of people out there that will do that for you. You need to be in your own corner, propping yourself up.
Yeah, great advice. Any final last words before we conclude and close?
Thank you. Thank everybody who's listened, who's asked such great questions. I appreciate the time. I appreciate the opportunity to be here and connect with everybody. You can all find me on LinkedIn. Um, I'd be happy to connect with anybody. My website is thestevejaffe.com. Um, if anybody would like, more advice, questions, anything that you can that you'd like help with, we talked about a network. I'm happy to be a part of anybody's network. So don't hesitate to reach out and connect. I hope you'd be interested in buying my book. You can go to Amazon, just type in the Layoff Journey, and if you're going through a difficult time, there's a lot of this framework and a lot of the exercises at the end of each chapter. There's kind of like a self-discovery that you can do on your own, like the North Star exercise is one of them. So it's a very practical guide that will help you manage this in a way that I hope um, lasts maybe a few short months or weeks rather than potentially years.
Yeah. And I see people in the webinar chat saying that this should be the start of a podcast between you and I. So if there's any interest, let me know, I guess. We could start something.
All right.
But yes, thank you so much again for your time here. I appreciate it. And you sharing your insights and everything you've learned through the multitude of layoffs you've been through. I want to thank everyone else again for joining us and asking all the wonderful questions that you have. You have been here for How to Navigate the Layoff Journey. My name is Albert, joined by Steve Jaffe. And yes, this will be available later on our YouTube channel, and we will be following up with the recording. So, with all that said, thank you all so much again. We have many more events coming up on Albert's list, both webinar style and in person. Please go to our Eventbrite page and sign up for them, and we will see you soon. Have a wonderful rest of your Thursday, and goodbye.